My name is Ikenna Azuike. I'll be your host for this session. Welcome to the Global Innovation Hub. This session is on exploring the capabilities and mindsets that we need in order to kind of amplify and achieve all of the ambitious climate goals that we have. Okay? We have a variety of speakers with all sorts of insights and ideas. And you'll have the opportunity later on to ask some questions as well, because this work really cuts across anything, any of the innovations that you're going to hear talked about here today, or indeed many of the other sessions in general. So it's very, very relevant. Yeah, if you're on social media, please use the hashtag #SystemsChangeNow and tag Climate-KIC, one of the co-hosts of this session. Okay, we've grouped the discussions today into different groups, okay? We'll start with the current lay of the land. What are good, strong examples of the progressive way in which capabilities and mindsets are being used to achieve climate goals? Oh, you want me to use that one instead? Okay. Yes, okay. Oh, lovely. This sounds much better. Okay. So some successful examples. We'll look at the challenges. What are the obstacles holding back progress in cities, and where are the opportunities? And then we'll take a look into the future to identify what the next steps are as to how we go about achieving broad-scale, progressive, positive changes when it comes to capabilities and mindsets. Perfect timing. I believe our first guest, who was supposed to be, has arrived. Round of applause, please. Thank you very much, sir. No problem. If you go and sit on the... Yes, thank you very much. It's good. I was just about to introduce everyone, so your timing is perfect, Mayor. The mayor of Brazilian city, Niterói. I'm sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly. It was great. Okay, wonderful. I don't believe you, but okay. Mr. Axel Grael. Axel, thank you. Climate-KIC's own capability expert. She's a director of learning. Solla Zophoniasdottir. We just practiced this. I just practiced it. From the Chora Foundation, working to bring systems frameworks, transformation frameworks, I should say, and tools to the climate change space. Senior Strategic Innovation Designer and Climate Change Lead, Emma Presutti. Emma? From the UNDP's Egypt office, with an expertise in developing institutions' capabilities across the international development and climate space, Reham Youssef. Reham, welcome. Oh, you have fans, Reham, you have fans. The Strategic Sustainability Advisor at the BMW Foundation, Herbert Quant, Eduardo Noboa. Eduardo, welcome. You have no fans, Eduardo, apparently. And from Dark Matter Labs, with more than 25 years of experience of raising capital, Kalia, of Kalia. Welcome, Raj. Okay, let's kick off. I said I'd like to first of all start with some examples of progressive ways in which new capabilities are being used in projects. New tools are being used. Mindsets are being shifted, and all with the fantastic end of achieving ambitious climate targets. Reham, would you like to kick us off? Do you have any concrete examples of this?
Thank you so much. Is the mic working?
I don't know. Use this one.
No. Yeah, can you hear me? Okay, great, thank you. So thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. And let me start with your first question. At UNDP, we realized post-COVID the uncertainty and the complexity of issues that surround us, and the need to look at issues in a different sort of way.
Keep the mic there. Yeah, perfect.
So looking at issues with a sort of a system lens, trying to understand the different complexities and uncertainty. And one of the core ways we actually endorsed at UNDP is the portfolio sense-making approach. So how to move from projects to portfolios. And one example that we used for that was collaborating with the Chora Foundation to rethink the sustainable tourism approach in Egypt. So what we did was we engaged in a process of looking inwards. So we started with ourselves, trying to change our mindsets, our capacities, in order to be able to actually start shifts in the development system itself. So we engaged in a process of learning, whereby we engaged not only with the tourism ministry, so not only with the national authorities, but there was a strong realization of the importance of engaging with the local, changing mindsets and capacities at the local level. So we went into an exercise of trying to identify where our North Star is, so what our strategic intent is, how we can actually try to shift the system towards tourism in Egypt is very, the tourism portfolio in Egypt currently is very much dependent on sun and sea and on high value, low value but high mass tourism. And so trying to cause a shift in that development system is quite difficult, especially when you are working with authorities that are focused on short-term wins. They want very fast outcomes. They want results on the ground. And trying to take them through a process and the long journey of trial and error and experimenting is extremely difficult. So trying to move that mindset from looking at very short-term wins into trying to experiment is quite challenging. Through our cooperation with Chora, we have tried to engage very much with our stakeholders, try to engage them in the process, and I think what is happening in Sharm el-Sheikh today is a very concrete example of that. So one of our projects is actually the Greening Sharm el-Sheikh project, which is focused on improving the way tourism in Sharm el-Sheikh is actually the way it's actually happening into a more sustainable form of tourism.
And what the North Star that you mentioned in relation to the approach that you have?
Our focus,
is that something you can condense into, like, you know, a sentence?
A journey of, I think we have a lot of tourists in the room, so it's a focus on the experience of the tourist. So a focus on the tourist rather than a focus on tourism revenues and trying to create value and all of that, into a focus of intentional tourism. So,
yeah, but every tourist is different, and is that does that flow from the systems innovation approach that everything is different?
Exactly. So it's all
but
about.
Then you've got hundreds of thousands of tourists.
Exactly. One of the key offerings that we actually worked on, and maybe Emma can also pick up on that, is how to connect ecotourism with the bigger framework of tourism in Egypt. So how to diversify the tourism offering so that people that are coming to Red Sea resorts for sun and sea can actually also experience the cultural tourism that is around Sharm el-Sheikh. So how to try to connect and focus on a sort of place-based tourism is one of the key offerings that we actually worked on, with a number of solutions that we proposed in order to take that forward. And actually most of those solutions are focused on local. So how to engage the local communities and ensure that the benefits are shared with the local communities so that they can endorse that as well. And trying to change the mindsets of local governments to actually understand that, and to focus on engaging communities and trying to move the revenues that are actually going to very international sort of sources into moving them towards the local communities, and that is one of the key offerings that we came up with.
Thank you very much. We'll expand on that a little bit more shortly. I'd like to bring in the mayor now. Axel, do you also have examples of areas in which, as part of a project, you've developed new capabilities, or you've shifted mindsets or focuses in how you achieve your climate goals?
Yes, well, good morning, everybody. In our case, our city is a 500,000 inhabitants city across the Guanabara Bay from the city of Rio de Janeiro. And we were the first city in Brazil to have a climate office. And the Secretary of Climate is here, is Luciano Paes here. And so we started a program, a public policy on climate change to the city. And it's important to point out that in 2010, there was a severe storm in our city, and more than 100 people were killed with landslides. So it's a vulnerable city because of our landscape. So we started this program, and today we have over 200 million program to stabilize the slopes and avoid landslides and floods. But the program was especially designed for climate change governance and participation. So we have a climate change council in the city involving government and civil society and universities. We also started a youth commission council, so students and youth can participate in the process. And we just started a city IPCC, bringing over the universities, so all the scholars that are searching. And the main experience I would like to share is we started a different experience in Niterói. We started a local currency that only runs in the city of Niterói. So all the public, all the social programs, people are paid with this local currency. And we selected one community, which is a low-income community that suffered a lot during that heavy rain, and people got killed. We started a community a program that families have to reach some goals, and if they reach the goals, they have a prize on the local currency. If they reach, if they decrease energy consumption on their homes, if they decrease the production of garbage, so there's some goals that they have to reach. So in the end, they have like a prize that are given, and we are prepared to work with 300 families to begin with. So it's an interesting experience that I would like to share with the other cities and the other colleagues.
Fantastic. I've never heard that idea before. Local currency, super. I want to kind of develop on that, because I think everything you described is really about long term. And, in your tenureship, for instance, you may not see the positive results of this stuff, and I think that's very much part of systems thinking, is thinking long term. And I'm wondering how much appetite there was amongst your, like, how did you build consensus? Was it easy? How did that go?
Well, building consensus is not always easy, but it goes on with the discussion, with the citizens, and show them that this is an important priority. Another experience is that we selected youth from different low income. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Hold on a second. Is that stopping? That's not us. Okay, no, that's somewhere else. So we just have to keep going.
Okay, so we selected 500 kids from different communities, low-income communities, and some communities with trouble like drug dealing and anything like that. So we attracted the kids to take part of a reforestation program, and they have professional skills training programs, and but they plant trees, and so it's also a program that is being well succeeded, and it has to do also with the climate strategy.
And hopefully training a new generation of young people to be stewards of nature. Emma, in your work, do you have examples of progressive ways in which there are new capabilities and are being developed and mindset shifts?
Thank you. I wanted to really build on what you were saying, Axel, and this idea of new value flows. So I think that's extremely important, and that's an approach that we have brought to rethinking the concept of tourism and sustainable benefit flows. So how do you actually start to value things like benefit to the environment, benefit to the local community, as well as the traditional benefit to the economy and government, and really ensuring that as tourism develops and evolves, it has a local foundation, because some of the mass tourism models that Reham was talking about are really reliant on international investment, but then of course those benefits flow back offshore. So how do we retain that? And what does a tourism sector looks like that's really built around this? Because it might look completely different. And in this new model, you might not need such a large volume of tourists to bring the same amount of benefit. It's just about where it's going. And so I love this idea of a new currency and really making it visible, and how can we do that with some of the natural assets that Egypt has, because there is so much biodiversity and so much variety in the landscapes. So that's really interesting to me. And then the perspective that Chora brings to this is that we, in working with the UN, really bring this, we support with processes and tools that allow them to both represent the problem of tourism, of sustainable tourism in this example, and then represent back to ourselves what are the effects that are actually being generated in that system. Because if you can't represent and hold the complexity of a problem, you're not going to be able to intervene on those dynamics and the parts that sit in between. So how do we connect up all these different initiatives that are happening at the local level in the local development authorities in Egypt, and connect them back up to the tourism ministry and their strategy? And so we really bring that capability to and tools to represent a complex problem, and then bring the processes that guide people through that journey, because it really is about reimagining ourselves, transforming ourselves and changing ourselves, and that's something that we heard on the panel discussions yesterday.
Yeah, it's about reimagining ourselves, transforming ourselves. Are those things that bankers have appetites to finance, though? Raj, you've got lots of experience in the finance sector. Do these, what people are trying to do here, and the examples that have been shared, how much appetite is there amongst in the private sector to finance projects like this?
Can you hear? Yes, that's better. Actually, I'm kind of blown away by the example, Axel, that I think everybody is, because...
Can you hold the mic a bit close?
The example, for me, that's a real example of community values which are directly related to the production of money. It's rather than a top-down central bank that prints money. So that's an allocation of capital, which I think is extremely important. Those micro values that are flowing from the values of that community, I think, and given that the money is created for that, is is a very targeted type of quantitative easing, is what we central bankers would call. So I think that's a really important example. I think just what I'm hearing so far, it reminds me about the whole issue with top-down allocation of capital. So there's always enough capital. Whether it's in private or public, it's more about how do you allocate that capital. And the only way you can allocate capital efficiency is if you have people that understand where it needs to be deployed. But to do that, you also have to have the capabilities and the capacity to be able to do that. So I think it's a multi-actor, many-to-many sort of approach that until you get that capacity and that capability, it's really hard to allocate that abundance of capital which is there. So I think it's less of a, how do you attract private finance? It's less about that, but more about how do you allocate capital efficiently in order to fund the spillover values that you need to capture at the community level.
Okay, but to allocate it efficiently, you also need to figure out where, what the climate ambitions are that you're trying to address and how you're going to do that. And is the private finance sector, are they open to financing that bit, the work that has to be done up front to figure this stuff out?
Yeah, that's a really good...
Because that also requires a mindset shift among in the private sector.
Exactly. And I mean, what we call that in traditional finance is that essential deal structuring that needs to happen right at the beginning of the financing, and that takes it definitely takes an amount of capital. But what's more important is if you that part of the deal structure has to be in place properly in order for you to go out there and attract private finance. And that's not an easy part. To get that right, you have to understand what are the essential the multidisciplinary approach that you need for that. It is not a risk-return aspect. Risk-return is a very bilateral relationship between an investor and those who need the money. So, in the deal structure, you have to understand who are the beneficiaries of the infrastructures that are being to be developed to become climate resilient, and that is definitely a difficult part.
Eduardo, it's a difficult part. Is that a role that you can help simplify as a donor?
Well, basically, I would like to approach the topic from another perspective. Maybe I've heard many different keywords which are very important here, like experimentation, inclusion, participation, value, and all those things. I can share with you a great example of some processes we have built in Latin America and many intermediate cities, where we have built some visioning processes, which is the start of a process of transformation. So in our experience, we have seen how when you build those collaborative platforms, multi-sectorial platforms, and start to challenge the status quo and integrate new perspectives into the city planning, into urban planning, and then combining this meta level of value reflection with place-making exercises in different areas of the city, because actually the scale is also very important, since there are different neighborhoods where you already have some leadership and some communities having some innovation processes. So every city is very different, and it depends on the scale. And those combination of a meta level reflection about vision, to have a common vision about the city, and those place-making exercises in different areas has an incredible potential to attract then investors that are interested and solve those problematics. Because actually the question is, what are the priorities in terms of sustainability, for example? What are the problems? But not the problems of the politicians, but the problem of the people, actually. So to define the problem is a very important issue, no? Because then if we are managed to define the problem according to the needs of the people, then we start to break in these paradigms and also these circular or vicious cycles where we are always investing where interests are located, no? But then if we start to be more participatory in terms of urban planning, then we will actually define
Yeah.
problems in a different way.
Okay. Eduardo's highlighted one aspect that's an obstacle here, Solla, defining the problem. What are the common reasons that people, what are the other obstacles holding back even more experimentation with capabilities and more radical mindset shifts?
I think from what to answer that, I would just like to thread something that I think has come forward in everyone here and everyone's little comments here, and that has to do with participation and collaboration. And I think, Eduardo, when you mention the challenge, and I think it is that deep understanding of the challenge is one thing. I think the other thing is for us to understand that collaboration and participation are not easy, and that actually takes a lot of practice and skill set to actually be able to be in deep collaboration. And in our cities and regions, that's actually what is really needed. We need to understand very deeply what are the mechanisms and what are the approaches in terms of the way that we collaborate, and what is ultimately are the mindsets behind that. So that has a lot to do with personal practice, which I think is also something that we have not necessarily put so much focus on.
And who are the usual suspects that aren't very good at collaborating, or does this cut across like everyone?
I think the usual suspects are us humans,
Okay.
right? That's the reason why we are all here. So we're really good at talking about collaboration. We are not necessarily as good as actually devoting the time into the practice that it takes. And I think, Axel, when you mention also youth participation, I think we need to put a lot more focus on not intergenerational collaboration, but what are the skill sets, what are the listening skills that we need, what are the actual ways of approaching that will actually make that a success.
And in terms of capabilities, are we talking about amplifying things that we're already doing, or is it about developing entirely new sets of skills? What do you think? Yeah, go ahead, Eduardo.
Well, when we talk about capacities and transformation, I think there are very basic capacities actually that we have to develop. So it's not about building a rocket science, but it's about building a process of social learning, like social learning loops, and stimulate certain capacities such as collective reflection. So the ability of a group of people to reflect together, and also collective anticipation. So how can people together imagine the futures and integrate different perspectives? So this is about building trust as well and social capital, so that people can easily mobilize their resources to one another because they trust in the others. So those are for me the basic capacities that we need to develop in order to succeed in the transformation.
But time for reflection requires a lot of patience, and you just need to. There needs to be budget as well to do this kind of stuff. And we're facing, annihilation, like environmental planetary annihilation. It's essential. Is it feasible, like, to create this kind of time to implement these sorts of ideas? What do you think, Reham?
Thank you. I think this is very interesting, and I think one of the key challenges is that governments and local governments, they want instant solutions to the problems, and so trying to take them out of that space into a wider space of collective engagement is a bit difficult. However, we are actually, we did mention that we have a number of offerings that we're providing as we rethink sustainable tourism, and we are actually socializing those policy options and alternatives with the different stakeholders. So we are actually already engaging with that. I think unexpectedly, people are engaging. They are very much willing to understand better what the policy options are and provide some insights and inputs on what's feasible and what's not and what we can change. And so trying to actually drag them into this trial and error is something that comes as we go. So it's very difficult to, from the outstart, say, oh, this is going to take so much time. And so the other alternative, and that's what we're actually doing, is to engage them in that process, and then the solutions come up.
Yeah.
And try to understand that they might fail, and trying to engage in exercises like system transformations mean that we might fail and fail fast, but that's better than failing on the longer run. So the costs of failing fast at the beginning and learning and trying to bring those learnings back into the process is actually what makes it learn. So trying to engage them in this adaptive learning process.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Great. And Axel, in Brazil, in your city, did you engage the public? Did they help craft new policies, or for instance, the idea about for the local currency? Let's try the other mic. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, yes, we have a process of consulting and building up those policies together with all the stakeholders in the city. But talking about challenges, I think when we talk about climate change, the big challenge is we end up between two very opposite approaches. One of them is disaster, and the other end is we can do things. And because if the approach is only disaster, people have a feeling that it's going to happen, and so let's save our souls and see what happens. And in the other hand, there's a lot that we can do together. And also, sometimes the problem seems too big to be done at the local level, but that's not true. Most of the people live in the cities, and most of the emissions are on the cities. So there's a lot of things we can do at the local level. And by the way, last COP, I was part of a small group of mayors that met with our Secretary General, and one of the things that we were asking was to have a larger participation of local and subnational governments, because there's a lot that we can offer, there's a lot of experiences that could be shared, and so, yeah, many things can be done, not only at the national level. So that was what we were talking about.
But at the heart of all of us, we are problem-solving creatures. We love figuring things out. We love making tools. And I said it in the last session. We need to embrace the complexity, but so many of us still don't do that. How do you train people to want to do the difficult things, to look for the discomfort? Solla.
I think in relation to also those two narratives that we find ourselves in between, in terms of everything is doom and gloom until we have to look for the opportunities, I think that there is a training field between that in relation to what you're saying around the complexity, and that is to train ourselves to be in discomfort. And that does, to the point that you were making before, that it does take time, and it does take investment in order for us to be able to be better to deal with that uncertainty. And that needs to be designed into our operational scenarios in cities as well.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I think a lot of people confuse comfort with happiness a lot of the time. But in terms of designing it into our processes and the way we approach this in general, what about the idea of creating safe spaces? Someone mentioned that in the last session, where you can experiment, where you can fail. Who would like to speak to that? Raj?
Sorry, thank you. That's a great, creating those spaces, and I think it's also related to this whole idea of collaboration and capacity building, but collaboration, the great example of collaboration is the scientific community. You've got, I think scientific community is where we can learn a lot about the processes that they have designed for scientific discovery, right? That in itself is innovation. So how scientists all over the world work together on solving a problem or a specific set of problems or discovery. I think there's a lot to learn for us financiers, but also for non-finance people. It's very, very important to understand how do you design, how do you collaborate, and you also have to understand that the contracting relationship in a collaborative mechanism is very different than a performance-based paradigm. Really, really important because, you know, in contract law, it doesn't matter what kind of legal system you have, in contract law, it's really about performance and breach of performance. Collaborative multiple outcomes contracts are very, very different. But in order to have a proper collaborative contract, you have to have the people with the skill sets, the necessary skill sets to work together. And ultimately, and it's probably an overused word, but it's only through collaboration and multidisciplinary approach can you get the synergy, right? Synergy is innovation. It depends on how you use the word. So I think it's not just about collaborating, but it's how you collaborate. And I think that's why I keep going back to the scientific community. It's taken a long time for even the scientific community to work on the big problems. COVID was a perfect example, right? Which where we had no choice but to collaborate, regardless of where we're from. It affected everybody, and scientists had to work had to check their egos and all that stuff behind. And I think that's a really good recent example of that.
And Emma, in your work, and let's take the example of the tourism mindset shift. Were there collaborations that kind of surprised you in that they worked, or new partnerships that you underwent?
So we are about to enter that stage, and what we are looking to do now is work out what are the organizational structures that will enable the activation and then dynamic management of a portfolio of strategic interventions in this space.
That was a long way of, that was a very long introduction. So you're about to figure out how you can design your organization So
organizations rarely structure themselves well to do this strategic learning.
Okay.
And so what we're seeing within the UNDP is that they're seeing that they need to move themselves more into this role of the orchestrator. And what we've seen in other UNDP offices, and as some of the learnings that we'll bring to the UNDP office in Egypt, is that we can bring solution providers together around this portfolio using some of the traditional structures. So use traditional RFPs, but bring those options or solution implementation providers into the room and make sure that the shared intent is known, so that you're creating this learning partnership and actively coming together to do that action reflection loop in a way that is really deliberate and creates space for that learning. And so we're really doing it together and trying to build the organizational muscle to do that. But that, of course, requires also equipping leaders to help us to create the right conditions for this to happen, because it is a different mindset shift, moving from a mindset of control to one of orchestration and strategic learning.
Super interesting. Axel, in Brazil, did you have... it's like that kids game. You have to unpack it at the end. Did you have to revisit the framework that was already in place in order to generate new ideas, or did you just build on what you already had?
Well, I think we had to build a framework, but there was a lot already there. And
what was new then? What was new?
Well, sometimes people were not aware of what they were doing had to do with climate change. If you put them together into that umbrella and you make people realize what they are doing is very important on that subject and on sustainability, then you make things that people are already involved with make sense into the program. So that was the main strategy, and bring some new people, especially students and young people. Bring them in, and make them involved. They are really active, and they want to get involved.
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of giving them the proper voice and the proper environment so they can speak out.
Yeah, I think that's really beautifully put. Yeah, people didn't realize they're already part of the solution in what they're doing. How much is that? How much is that something you've seen before, Solla?
Yeah, I think in many of the learning parts that we have been actively supporting with our stakeholders and the projects that we are working with. And I'll take an example as a live collaboration that we have with the Swedish International Development Agency. We are really seeing that it's important to get beyond the people that are working in designated climate departments, designated development work, or designated innovation units, and really engage with those actors, as you're mentioning, that are working in other departments. So there are, in city systems and in regional systems as well, there are multiple levers, and there are individuals sitting there that are, we do need to collaborate with them for a much more focused understanding of the complexity of the climate challenges, deeper collaboration, and innovation in our procurement processes, in all kinds of other arenas that are essentially limiting, unconsciously, in many cases, progress. And it's through creating those pockets, back to your comment as well, around where is it that we can work together on leveraging learning and creating also learning between different units in cities. There are unconventional, because that's also where you create a field of possibility, and potentially new joint narratives of how to leverage or create innovation.
And what about the difference between collaboration at regional level, at neighborhood level, or national? How do you kind of distinguish between, you know, is there an approach? Do you I see some nodding here.
Thank you. Let me just make a very quick comment on this creation of spaces, because at UNDP we were actually lucky that in 2019 we launched the network of accelerator labs in 115 countries, and this is exactly the purpose of the accelerator labs, is to create those spaces to experiment and to try with no requirements of performance, and they are not really constrained in any format. And the accelerator labs are actually the labs that are advocating for things like portfolio sense making and trying to shift those mindsets. So I just want to say that it's important to realize early on that we need to change the way we think of problems ourselves in order to be able to make those shifts in the system and try to build those capacities on the national, regional, and subnational levels as well. So it's all about us. It's all about looking inwards in order to drive things forward. And I think that is a very important space. Unfortunately, on the local level and national levels, they are not as flexible. And trying to bring in system transformations usually collides with their standard traditional planning processes. And it's always a challenge to try to, you always collide with regulations, with requirements, with, as you already mentioned, performance and the need to deliver. And so trying to pull them out of that into a different process of adaptive learning is extremely challenging. But again,
how did you manage?
Let me say, there are a lot of change makers. You would be surprised. They are somewhere in every city, and they are ready to drive change. It's just about trying to identify those stakeholders that would actually support the process.
So what are the signals? I mean, let's get really practical for people in the audience saying, okay, I love the sound of this. It would never work where I am.
I'll give you an example.
Yes, go.
In Sharm el-Sheikh, where we are all today, we were trying to advocate together with our stakeholders the ban of single-use plastic bags. This required, because this is not something that is already mainstreamed on the national level, this required a champion on the local level, like the governor, that endorses and enforces that and forces the different supermarkets and shops, etc., to comply. And it took a lot of effort, but he was able to actually pull through the decree on time. Again, of course, having something like COP is always a reason to do that. But again, if you have that person that is willing to drive that change and promote that advocacy and try to engage the communities and stakeholders, and at the end, it did work with all the campaigns and all of that. So,
I mean, is it more than that? Is it a case of like without that person, you might as well give up?
No, definitely not. Again, change makers are everywhere. You just have to identify them. They are sitting in the local offices.
They're sitting among us.
Exactly. So I think it's just about trying to find the right people that are willing to engage, and they definitely drive the processes. So I think it's always, I wouldn't say we should give up. And I think, again, with things like open spaces, accelerator labs, and others, these really drive changes not only externally but also internally. So I think...
yeah, and how many accelerator labs were there, did you say?
115 currently.
150,
So, yes.
Fantastic. Do we have any questions? Yes, straight away. What's your name and what's your question?
My name is Claire McGuire. I'm speaking from the International Federation of Library Associations and the Climate Heritage Network. I love hearing all of this talk about collaboration. And I wonder if you have any reflections on cultural institutions like libraries, museums, monuments, and sites, not just as places to bring tourists in, but as nodes of transformation and nodes of collaboration.
Who'd like to speak to this? Solla, go ahead. We should have a pulley system.
Thank you for bringing in that question and highlighting that there are so many pockets of convening that are being underutilized in this arena. I think that what I would like to bring there, I think that in Climate-KIC we have been previously working with different associations or networks of museums for specifically the one to put focus on climate impact issues. I think the places, the part about convening and being able to convene people around a certain topic is something that is very underutilized there. And I think that is something that I would at least sort of start with, that you have a possibility of convening, and then what can that container bring, I would say, is the first possibility. Because there's a diversity also in age groups that you can engage there. But I don't know if there's anyone else that would like to add.
I think it almost goes to what Axel was saying, is it not, to see yourself as really part of the solution, seeing yourself as a convening space. You've got so much to offer. Go ahead.
No, basically, I wanted to add that those places like museums are helping us to build narratives, different kind of narratives with different cultural artifacts that we can use actually to convene people, to articulate different actors, to create new narratives, and as you mentioned, narratives at different levels, national, global, local. And the more local is the narrative, is more down to earth, is more going from values to solutions. And this is important to know, that if you go to a local community, then it's always, of course, about values, but then you get to understand more the problem and the actual solution that we want to intervene in that area. Otherwise, the global and national narratives are more about values, which is also very important.
Clear. Thank you. Any more questions in the audience? Yes, one there. Go ahead. Tell us your name as well.
My name's Julianne Rolfe. I'm from the American Chemical Society. And so I'm wondering what influences universities have and the scientists and engineers within them working to solve this problem, especially because for the longest time, scientists really struggled making 100% definitive statements about climate change for fear that they might be wrong. And society and humans need confirmation before making change at this scale. And so I'm wondering how you're working with those scientists and engineers at universities.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Go, Axel, did you say? Oh, I'm sorry. What influence can scientists and academic institutions have in terms of all the things that we've been talking about here? Because that community traditionally need data. They need confirmation. They're data-driven. And some of the experimentation and the failing doesn't kind of rhyme with that.
I can add on that. Transdisciplinary research is the answer from my perspective. So we need to start thinking in silos and in different disciplines, but start to create in these transdisciplinary processes where we start building knowledge also with local actors, but also with different disciplines and scientists. And that will be an answer from my side, yeah.
And I think also the idea of safe spaces speaks to that as well. That creating places where we can try and help convince scientists it's okay to not know for sure, you know, but that's what science does anyway. Yeah.
I just add to what you said. I think those safe spaces are actually the new universities. And what universities or academic institutions should be doing is helping to structure the data. So data is flowing, it's infinite. You get data from all different sides. But in order to, I think the scientific community, again, academic institutions have a good understanding of how to structure it. But I think the new institutions of learning are these innovation labs or accelerators, because that's how innovation in the private sector has happened. And I think we can adopt something like that from that perspective.
Lovely. And how glorious that scientists can reflect and rediscover the new identities, new roles. Yes, Solla, go ahead. Oh, and Axel.
I just wanted to add on, from my perspective, at least from what it is that we are seeing in Climate-KIC, universities and scientific institutions are also very willing, and they do want to come into, at least we have a lot of them in our partner network that are really curious as well about what is the role that they can play and how can they indeed transform themselves and come closer into the collaboration. So I just want to make a point there that they are also looking at what's the new frontier for us, and I think that's where cities and regions need to come into that dance.
Well, what I would like to add is that, if you, like in a Brazilian perspective, we just had national elections, and the government that is there today until 1st of January was the negationist government that was supporting the burning of the Amazon and was, and of course, our country was full of fake news and making people very confused. So it's very important for us, for instance, when we started our local IPCC, to bring academia much closer to the policy making, because we must explain people and explain climate change is not basic, it's not easy, because it's very complex, to a normal citizen understand, atmospheric chemics and physics and geography and international relations, so people can understand what's going on in this meeting here. So it's not easy. I think scientists are very important to bring good information and in a way that people can understand and trust that there's a way out, because there's a strong tendency that people go into panic, and that we don't want that.
No, fantastic. Well, okay, one very, very brief question. Okay, we have to wrap up. Sorry. Thank you.
I'll be very brief. I'm Imogen Wood. I'm from the National Trust for England, Wales and Northern Ireland. We're also members of the Climate Heritage Network. You mentioned about donors and getting donors to invest and thinking about those connections with people, place, and through storytelling, and using heritage to connect people with places and why they're important to try and conserve them. My question is, how can we get donors to start thinking about investing in storytelling and people and cultural shift rather than just offsetting their carbon emissions?
Are donors interested in that? Very briefly, unfortunately.
I have one example. Just last week, I was in the Netherlands at a conference sponsored by Azuike and Common Land, and I met a philanthropist, and she said she only provides capital if there is a narrative and a story in context. She says, I'm actually less interested in the numbers and my lawyers who do the due diligence. I'm more interested in, and she says she needs to hear that narrative. So I'm just giving you an example, just happened to be coincidental from last week.
Yeah, I'm working for the BMW Foundation. Basically, we are investing in human capital and leadership. And what we do is basically articulate different actors, change makers, and leaders in order to create those narratives. So we are basically investing in new narratives.
Okay, and the final word, Emma?
And just to add to that, in every single one of our portfolios, there's been a narrative or identity component. And so for us, it's really about investing in the whole, not just the parts, and ensuring that narrative is present. Even if there's no clear value case for it, it's there in the logic of the portfolio.
Okay, fantastic. What an uplifting session, everyone. Love talking about experimenting and failing and learning. Fantastic. Look, it takes courage, clearly, to be willing to change your mindset and think really in a systems innovative way. But the benefits are clearly there on a personal and planetary level. So just do it. Someone else, that's a good tagline. Someone else should use that, right? Just do it. Thank you very much, everyone.